always so loud when it says that. First things first, what we're going to be talking about today is scraping. I know some of you guys might not quite be there yet, and a few of you are there. What is the point of scraping? Why is scraping a technology we might want to use? Any thoughts or ideas?
Pull information from a website without having to search through it ourselves.
Yeah, so like basically if we go to a website and we want to pull some information from that website, there are other things like APIs, and we'll get into APIs like later in the curriculum that you can use, but some websites don't provide that. And we might still want a way to grab information from the website to gather it. Why? And I guess you might think like, well, couldn't you just send them the link? Like, so for example, you might like want to scrape all the reviews of like different like movies or something like that. And you could say, well, I can just send them the link and then they'll see all the reviews there and they can navigate the website normally. That's true. But by being able to scrape, you could also visit like 5 different websites that have reviews and scrape all of those and actually combine or do something with that data that you grab from all the separate websites. So scraping is simply just a tool that we can use to access websites and grab and pull down information. What we're going to be doing today and looking at scraping is we're going to look at it in context of building your own application. And so hopefully it will get you kind of in the mindset of thinking about your own project and how you would approach your project as we start doing this. So one thing that we do need for scraping is we need a website that actually has HTML content. And there are a lot of websites out there that fit that mold. You will find more and more there are websites being loaded just with JavaScript, and our scraping techniques don't work with JavaScript because the point of scraping is it looks at the HTML loaded on initialization of that site and it scrapes that HTML. And when a site is loaded with JavaScript, basically what that means is that the HTML gets added to the website after the initial load. And so we will miss the HTML being added and we won't have HTML to scrape. So for example, and what we're going to work with today, we're going to look at a site that I know works, but I also want to share with you a tool that I've created. I'm just going to share my desktop, I think. A tool that I've created that also will help you look at a website. So IMDb is one we always use as an example because it is HTML loaded and works really well. But I also made a REPL that I will share with all of you guys. And even as we're going today, if you want to play around with it or test your own stuff, this REPL is, the point of it is you can check to make sure a site works. So for example, this is just so we can check and see scrapability of a site before we actually start building out a project. And it also is a way that we can look at and see how scraping works. So for scraping to work, we do need 2 gems to be involved. And so the way that we would deal with that in a REPL is we would require Nokugiri and we would require OpenURI. Anyone know what these gems are doing or what they're responsible for? No. That's okay. And some of you guys might not have covered this section yet, but OpenURI is going to be the one that gives us the Nokugiri means saw in Japanese. Good to know. I actually didn't know that. Transposing code, Courtney, that's pretty accurate. So OpenURI is going to give us the ability to open a site inside of our code. And then Nokugiri is going to give us the possibility of getting that code back in node modules so we can actually look through it and grab the information that we need. So at its most bare bones, when I basically use Nokugiri and OpenURI together, OpenURI is going to open the website and Nokugiri is going to parse it into something that we can use to actually go through and grab out the information that we need. It is currently, when I have this code right here through line 5, what it's currently doing is it's basically taking everything from this site the raw HTML, and it is giving us an option to be able to then look through it. So if we actually look at it as elements, it's grabbing all of our HTML and all of this that's on the page, and we now have it in our page, and we can look through it and we can see the output. And so just for the sake of it, actually, we're just gonna print out the page, and it should be like a ridiculous amount of information on the right-hand side because it's like all of the HTML. And as you can see,
what does it do with the scripts?
Like the JavaScript scripts at the top. Is that what you mean? Nelson, is that what you were asking?
I think so, yeah.
So it looks like, and actually this is kind of a good question that I haven't really dived into. I don't think it's going to be doing anything with those. I think it will start. I think it will start once we actually get into the body. But to be very honest with you, I'm not positive because I've never looked for, like, the scripts aren't going to be useful for you. So I've also never looked, I've never tried to grab the scripts. Although this kind of looks like a script because there's a if window.jQuery type, like this is JavaScript in here. Oh, look, they do grab the scripts. So it grabs everything. And we can see this is like a huge amount of stuff because what it's doing is it took everything from this website and it put it into these Nokogiri elements and attributes that we now have access to grab. And the way we grab them is by using CSS selectors. So that's why CSS selectors are pretty important and useful for us in scraping. And so when we go to scrape, the next piece that you will need to know and you will use is this tool will be so useful. So looking at our site, we basically have to decide what we want to scrape. Personally, I think it's kind of fun that they have this Born Today section. So I'm just gonna scrape the people who are born today. I know, very simple, but it's just gonna be where we start and then we can take it a little bit further from there. And so if I wanted to scrape these people born today and have my application give me information back on that, I would wanna come over here and basically using this tool, so make sure that this tool is blue, you would select whatever it is that you're trying to grab. And so I'll click here, you'll see her name in there. You'll see a lot of other information as well. Notice this link doesn't have any CSS selectors, but there are CSS selectors above it that it's nested under. So a few like tips of the trade that I've picked up after doing this for a while is one thing that you can do is you can right click here and you can go to copy and you can actually say copy selector. And then I'm going to paste what it is. It's going to give you way more information than you need. But I just think it's useful to take a look at what it does give you. So this is giving you all of the elements that it's nested inside of. So that link that we want to grab is nested in a div. And that div is nested in another div that has two CSS selectors. Those of you guys who have started Nokogiri section, or maybe just remember from CSS, anyone know what the dot is notating? What does that dot mean? Oh, I see it in the chat. That is a class selector. Yeah, so whenever we see this dot, this means that widget caption is a class. So coming back over here, we see right here that this div has a class and it has two classes, widget caption and caption below. Notice what this did for you is it actually changed those into just one statement. And that's how you would select it too. If you wanted to select that div, you would chain it with both classes attached with dots in between. So if I wanted to select just that section, just this div widget, and the reason I'm choosing that and not the A tag is there are a lot of A tags on this page. And so if I choose the A tag, I'm probably getting a lot more information than I need. I try to choose a selector that's specific. And we'll kind of see that as we go into actually like building this out in a second. And so this is still my testing phase. I just want to make sure that it works. The fact that I got a lot of information over here means it probably worked, but you just want to double check by making sure you can see something. I do have .text on the end of there, and I'll show you what it looks like without .text and why I put it in. Do we see in this output what we were originally looking for? See a few nods. We see the name Ming Na Wen right here, and that was what we were looking for. We also wanted all of these other names as well. And so clearly it is giving us the information that we want. And so this is where, like, when we are doing this, you want to start here and just do something very simple to make sure you see the info back in your output, because if you don't, that means that it's a site loaded with JavaScript. And so there are a few other indicators that your site might be loaded with JavaScript. One of them is when you actually go to the site itself. If you see like the top part load and then the rest of it has like a spinny circle and is loading, probably that info is being loaded in by JavaScript. Actually, like almost certainly that info is being loaded by JavaScript. If part of it loads and then the rest loads it later. And that would be an indication that it is not scrapable. And so in here, the other difference that I just wanted to talk about before we move over is this .text. The only reason I add it is it just makes your life a little bit easier in looking at the output. This is what our output looks like without .text. A bit crazy. This information can be useful, and we will go through this because this information has things like, I saw it somewhere. We actually like have the value of like links, and we have other information when we, oh, I think someone is not muted. But maybe, were you asking a question, Christian?
No, just talking to myself.
Okay, no problem. So when we go through this piece, like there's just a ton of information, but it could be useful. So when we actually scrape, we'll start. We won't add the .text until we drill down onto the element we need. But .text is just an easy way when testing to take out all the extra stuff and look at what was the text that came back. So this is my tool that I gift to you. When you start typing on here, it will make your own copy. And in here is where you'll put your site that you want to test. And in here, you'll put a selector that you choose, just to make sure that it works. So moving on from that, because we actually, we're going to start kind of making a project today in terms of also scraping. So our end goal, like we said, is we want to scrape these people whose birthdays are today, and we're going to report back some information to them. So I'm going to work locally today. I know a lot of you guys are still working out of your IDE, and that is fine. If in watching me work locally today, you have the desire to switch to a local environment, just reach out to either Chris or myself, depending on who your cohort lead is, and we can connect you with the instructions. I will say if you're like behind and catching up on content, it might be a better idea just to focus on catching up on content. But if you're like feeling pretty solid about where you are in the curriculum, we do recommend switching to a local environment before the project. It just makes your life a little bit easier. So getting started today, this is my local terminal, just like your IDE terminal. And I just went ahead and made a folder for our demonstration today. So we have this folder called scraping, and there is absolutely nothing in here. So list would show you anything inside of the folder. And we're gonna go ahead and start by just making a bin directory. And this is what's gonna run the program. So like your tic-tac-toe that has been going on, you had a bin directory that ends up running the program. Inside of my bin directory, we are gonna add one file, and this is the file that's gonna like start everything. Typically we name it something similar to what our project is called. So I'm just gonna call it stars because we're getting the stars who were born today. Maybe that's a bad name, but for right now, simple enough, we're just gonna call it stars. And then I'm gonna open up my code so we can take a look and add some information here. This is my text editor. I know in the IDE, a lot of times they're connected. I just have them separately. So here's my terminal, and then this is where I write my code. Inside of here, if I just want to get my code up and running, my bin, my executable file is where we're going to like start our program. So like when we want to start our program and when we'll test our program today, we will type Ruby to tell it which language we're running in, stars. And at the bare bones, most basic, just to make sure this is working, I'm going to go ahead and say puts hello. So we can see if that works. And we should see hello in the output. Cool, it looks like it's working so far. What we would really like to do though is we like to keep things separate. So our bin starts the program, but all of our code is usually going to go in a lib folder. And so I'm going to go ahead and make another folder and we'll call it the lib. Now you can see I have two folders inside of my main folder. And then I'm also going to add, Touch just creates files. I'm also going to create a file called CLI. And so coming back over here, we should now have a lib folder and a CLI. And the difference is instead of our stars saying anything, what we want our stars to do is we want our stars to basically start our CLI or run our CLI. So the first thing that we'll have to do is we have to tell this file about the CLI. So we'll require relative, and then we'll tell it to go look over in the lib. Just curious out there, does anyone know what this notation is stating over here?
Go back one directory.
Yeah, so it's telling me to go back up a level so that I'm outside of the bin and then look for the other, then I can look for the lib and go into the CLI. So this would require our CLI. At the bare bones, most basic, we can make a method in here, we'll call it run. And we're gonna just say like in the CLI. And so from here, we just wanna make sure that these are talking to each other. So I'm just gonna call run and hope that it outputs my run. So we'll just try this again. Ruby bin stars. And now we are in the CLI. So good news, we can start actually worrying about scraping because we are in our CLI. So what we wanna do here is we wanna start thinking about kind of like an application that is going to scrape info and put it back onto the terminal. So we will start here with where it says in the CLI. We'll actually say maybe welcome to birthdays of the stars. I don't know what we want to call it. You can come up with a better thing for that. And then this is where we actually will start our scraping. And so similar to that replet that I sent you guys, or that REPL, what we first want to do is we'll outline what our site is that we want to scrape. So we wanted to scrape HTTP. Actually, I'm just going to copy and paste it so I don't make any typos, because I would. And then after we just grab that site, what we want to do is we would open that URL. So we can go ahead and we can open our site. This is going to give us back some HTML, but it's not going to be readable. And so our final step, so that we can actually look at node modules and iterate over things, was we would go ahead and we would say, okay, Nokugiri, do your work, translate this HTML into something that's readable. So I have it a little bit more nested in the REPL. And so I just wanted to show you that these steps are really happening separately. So we open the site, and then we use Nokugiri to parse and to turn it into code that is readable for us. For this to work, for open and Nokugiri to work, what other pieces do I need to add, since those are gems that we're relying on? Yeah, we got to require them. So this at the moment is not going to work, and I'll even just show you what it says in case this is an error you run into. No such file or directory at RB system open. It doesn't know what to do on the open line. That's our first command that it needed a require for. So we'll go over here to the top, and we'll go ahead and we'll start by requiring open URI, and then we'll require our other file, which is Nokugiri. And just because I want us to be able to play around, we will also require pry. Oh. So if we go ahead and run this, okay, looks like some stuff happened. We aren't going to see the output, but this is where we actually want to start being able to play around with it. So I'm going to add a binding pry and we'll go ahead and stop here. Okay, cool. So now if I type in doc again, we're going to get something very similar to when we were in our REPL, and we just get a ton of information, tons of information. And so when we break this down, there's kind of going to be two steps that we take. One, we want to make our doc, so instead of looking at the whole page, we want to be specific so that we can find things that are repetitive that narrow down our section. So similar to what we chose before in this Born Today, we could go ahead and we could use those same selectors. We just want to make sure maybe that it's a little bit more specific. And what I mean by that is let's do the same thing we did before, because I don't think it's still in my copy. What is the effect of require? It brings, so these gems are installed like locally on my computer. And so it brings in the ability for me to use these gems, essentially. So it tells my program that these gems are on my system and that it can use, like to use those libraries of code. And so it gives meaning now to the word open and to no kugiri because it's now using these libraries of code. It's like bringing in other, it's weirdly like similar to require relative, but this is like something within my own program that I'm requiring, whereas require is actually requiring something that's installed on my computer or my machine. But good question. So these were our selectors again as we were looking at it, and we want something that is similar. So let's start just by grabbing this div again. And the way we are going to grab anything is we'll come back to this doc and we just simply do .css. We will always pass it in as a string, and then we can put in our selector. One thing that I like to do is this is going to come back as multiple elements or multiple, like an array of different elements that we can deal with. So I always like to do like a .size or .length or .count to figure out, okay, how many elements did it grab? It grabbed 10. Do we have 10 birthdays people over here? No. So it's grabbing something that we don't want as well. And that is something that you'll have to work through in your code, is sometimes these selectors aren't specific enough. And because they're not specific enough, you'll grab other information that you actually don't need. Looking through here, it seems like the other information we might want is their age. So we do want their name and then potentially their age. Let's see, it's all inside of another div. Did this other one say primary as well? Because if it doesn't, we can't use div primary, but if it does, okay, it looks like it does. So we're at widget caption below, but we're getting too many pieces of information. What we can do is we can tag on another .css. So we can say within this widget, all of the stuff you got back, we want to hone down a little bit more specific, and we want to grab divs with the class of primary. And I just want to specify with this notation of like scraping, what we're doing here is this is the name of the element. The dot is telling us that this is a class and that primary is the class. Other things that are acceptable is you can just say, you could just do dot primary, and that would specifically say, look for a class of dot primary. I like to be as specific as possible because it could be that they use the class primary on links or on span elements or paragraph elements, and I only want div elements with the class. So I would do div dot primary. Sean, you asked a question, does seeing .html in the URL, is that an indication that the website is 100% safe to use? Probably, yes, because I'm guessing that it's a site then made in HTML. I I'd be curious to know what site it is. And then also, and this was one thing I was going to kind of like come back to at the end, is just because it's in HTML doesn't necessarily mean it will work well for your project. Because notice we're using CSS selectors to grab information, and we're relying on the fact that every single one of these people has the same CSS selectors, because this site was built in a way that like makes sense. There are other sites out there where you'll look at their CSS selectors and you'll notice that they maybe use like weird numerical IDs, and they don't have any classes, and they just have IDs that change numbers for everything. And some of those are going to be a lot harder to scrape because they don't have a fixed repetitive pattern. I realized I forgot to do dot size on the end of this. That was the point. So now we've got it down to 5. By being more specific, we were able to grab this down to 5. One other way we can write this, and it is the same thing, is instead of chaining 2 .css's, we can tell it that the div primary should be nested under the div widget caption below by actually just combining these and putting a space. So this is saying that be looking for a div primary that's inside of a div with a class of widget caption and a class of caption below. And so we get 5 as well. So these are the same way of writing the same thing. I found a lot of people find this way easier, which is why I demonstrated this way first. So what I do once I get it down to be like, when I know my right information is in there and I know the size is what the size that I'm looking for, this is when I can take this information and add it to my project. So I can come over here and say, we'll save this as a variable what the results are that it's giving me. So I would say these are my, what do I want to call it? This is my basically array of stars. And the reason I can think of it as an array of stars, remember this has a size of 5. So we basically are grabbing the same information for all 5 of our people 5 times. And this is kind of important that we get this step. I do want to emphasize your first train of focus is to narrow down on the information that you want and to grab it so that you have these repetitive blocks so that we basically have this information, like we have each of them and they're all held in an array. And the reason I say that is we want to narrow down so that now we can iterate and just grab the specific information that we want. So the next piece that we're going to try to grab is we actually specifically want to see their names come up. So coming back over to our scraping, we now have our array of stars. And actually, just to make this a little bit easier, I know I didn't really need to restart that, but we're going to go back into our pry now that we have array of stars to work with. And when we're dealing with our array of stars, we now have the possibility of we can iterate. So we can look at each element at a time. And so when we're looking at each element, you can think of it like we're looking at this div first. So we're taking it like basically one div at a time or one section at a time. So let's just call it, we'll just call it section. You can name that whatever you want it to be. And inside of here, just to see if we grab the right stuff, where I'm going to have it puts out, did I misspell something? I see spelling on there, array of stars. Oh, thank you. I did not see that at all. This is why I got a second set of eyes here. Array of stars, and what we want to print out is our goal is to print out each of their names. So coming back here to grab and look at their names are actually inside of a link. And so we probably want to drill down a little bit further. We're inside of this div class, but we probably want to make sure we're looking at the link and then specifically grabbing the text, the text, not the test. So section is going to represent this entire div. So we can say section.css, and we'll just grab the link. So we'll get one section closer, and then we'll grab the text. And hopefully that will be their names. I say hopefully. Nope, that gave us, oh no, this is just the return value. Cool, so we did get all of their names. So we got the names of our stars that we were looking to grab. When we kind of turn this into actually our code that we start writing, code-wise, we're gonna wanna do something a little bit more than just printing out. That's a good place to start. And in our CLI, we might think about we wanna start printing these out. But it might be more useful to keep track of this information. So I'm gonna want to keep track of each name that I'm grabbing. So we kind of want to have all of the names of stars, we'll call it this. And we're just gonna go through and do a map so that it returns just their text. And then down here we are in this run. So let's use this as like a CLI, and let's actually go through. And you might say, why are we doing this separately? But there's a reason. And we'll print out each name below. Name. And we could actually here, let's just make it a little bit more special. We'll do a with index starting at 1 so that we can print out, we'll print out the name and the index. Make it look a little bit fancier. So if we have done this correctly, what should happen is when we run this code again, we won't get stopped in a binding cry because I took that out, but it should just return back to us a list of here are the stars with birthdays today. So welcome to Birthdays of the Stars. Maybe I'll even say these stars have birthdays today. So let's go ahead and we'll exit. So if you ever get stuck in a pry like that where you don't have the cursor, if you just hit Q, it will get you out of it. We'll go ahead and run, and if everything was done correctly, we should see a list of our people. Cool, they're there. This isn't really that useful yet though, because we just have people and we didn't do anything with their birthdays, and we didn't do anything where maybe like they have more facts, like it'd be kind of cool, like they could choose a person to learn more about, we could grab more facts from them. And so there are a few other pieces and things that we might want to do to this in scraping so that it's more than just a name. If we wanted to grab more than just a name and we also wanted to grab their birthday, what are some ideas you guys have? Just how would you initially approach that if we want to store 2 pieces of information about this person instead of 1 piece of information? Any thoughts? So Courtney, that's actually a great idea. And that's how you'll see in a lot of the scraping labs, they'll start you off. So we were storing these just as an array. What if instead we thought about storing these as a hash? So what if instead, we're gonna do it, we're gonna say stars hash, and it's just gonna start as an empty hash for the moment. And then when we iterate over this section, we're gonna do 2 pieces of information instead of 1. So we're gonna add to our stars hash, we want to add a key of name. Actually, am I thinking about this right, how we wanna do this? We probably all want these to be separate hashes that get added to our array. Yes, so we'll keep this as a map. Star hashes will be equal to here. And what we'll do inside of this is basically, we'll be setting up a hash inside of this. So now instead of just being an array of names, it will be an array of hashes. And we'll have 2 keys and values. We'll do a key of name, and then we'll do a key of age, so that we have these 2 separate pieces set up. And so now let's look at how we could grab that age. Oh, I did not mean to save that. And so we'll come back over here and look at where do we see this age. So what element is this age inside of?
Primary.
Yeah, it looks like that is back out in just the div and not the aref. The hard part is, I feel like if we grab the text of the primary, we're also going to get their name. Which so this can kind of change our approach to it. So maybe instead of even doing that text, we could just do a dot text in general. And this would be their name and age. I think we'll stop in a binding pry to see, actually. So let me go ahead and comment this out, because I think this is going to be our name and our text. Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. Nelson, thanks for that advice, is we'll probably split it into the first half and the second half. I just think it's really useful as you're doing this. This is like, if you haven't been using pry a lot, once you start scraping, pry is so useful because it really is like a treasure hunt of, let me put these CSS selectors into my document and figure out where I can find the information back. So right now where we're located is we are in our binding pry inside of an iteration. And so we can see what name and age give us. My hunch is it will be their full thing. Perfect. And then it looked like you were suggesting a split, Nelson. What would I split on? Thoughts on what I should split on? Anyone? Yeah, so good. I'm so glad. I was thinking one of you guys might just say a space, but a space we could run into trouble because then it would split for them first and last name as well. Or if they had three names, it would really throw us off. And so they have used this really nice notation of putting parentheses around the age. And so that gives us a clear indicator that we really want to be splitting where there's a space and a parenthesis. So we'll do a space and a parenthesis, and this will give us back an array of the name and an array of the age. We probably want to get rid of that piece, but we can in a second. And let's actually first do something else. How would I get rid of, in this very first example, the extra white space on the outside? You see how that has like an extra space on the right and an extra space on the left? Is there a Ruby command that would help me get rid of that extra space? Okay, I see .chomp and .split. Let's try them both. So we'll add in a .chomp. That I actually thought was going to do something and didn't. So let's try .strip. I think strip is going to actually get rid of both on both sides. Yeah, there we go. Cool. So now we're dealing with less white space in here, and we have a little bit more of the information that we need. We can, let's actually, just so we can save this name, we'll call it, I'm using a lot of variables here because I think it helps some people to think about it in one step at a time. We don't necessarily have to be doing this in like these multi-steps. We could be saying name and age is equal to section, .text, .strip, .split. Like we could do it all in one line. But sometimes I think it's useful to, when you're still learning, to like think about it in the multi-steps. So just know that there is more than one way to do that as well. Would name and age work to cut out the first and last characters? Let's just see. I'm all for testing. So we'll go 1, -2. Let's see what that gives us back. Perfect. That would be another way that we could deal with it instead of strip. Great suggestion, Lucy. And so now that we're here, now we can put this back in, and our name is going to be our info array, just the first part of our info array. And our age is going to be the second part of our info array. but we also want to delete this last little piece. Any good ideas on how to just get rid of that last parenthesis? Yeah, we could split and we could do some other things. Any other, but is there like a simpler way to get rid of that last parenthesis? Ooh, so maybe we could do like, we could do a dot chomp with a argument. Let's try it. So just to see kind of like, this is basically what our number looks like. So let's see what happens if we do dot chomp and give it an argument. That looks so weird to read that. Ah, perfect. Oh, chop. I don't know. Yeah, I think chomp is what we need here, but it was the right suggestion, so it does work. There's also a few other things, and one thing you'll notice, like some of these aren't going to give you exactly what you want out of here. And gsub is another really cool Ruby command that will be useful. What gsub does is basically you can pass in whatever you want to take out, and then you can pass it in a second argument whatever you want to put in. I don't actually want to put anything in here, so I would just leave it as an empty space. But if you had the situation, maybe it was like money and you wanted to add a $sign or something like that, that's another good command to use. Oh, that's why dot chop had an argument error. I see what you're saying. So, yes, okay. So dot chop would work as well. Regex would work too. I just try to go for the easiest option that I can find. So regex would work, but I don't think that's the easiest option here. So we'll do a dot chop onto the end and get rid of that last element. And now we should have the stars hashes is going to basically be an array of these hashes. So now when we print out all of this information, we're now going to print out, I have way too many variables that I've named in here. We're going to print out the stars hash instead. And that's going to change our each a little bit because, oh no, it's still going to be an array. But this is going to represent like a hash. Like this is going to be our individual star hash. So we'll come through here and we'll say something like star, and we can access the name. And then we might want to say is turning star, and we'll access the age. Let's see if that works. And then we're going to turn it into the way that we really should be doing this. But for scraping wise, this is like a good way to start. Please don't break. Perfect. So we've got all of their information. We've successfully scraped both their name and their age and have printed it out. And if you guys aren't sure, that's okay, but I just kind of want to throw it out there. This works, like we're getting our answers back. But based on what you're learning with objects and things like this, once we start storing everything in the hash, it starts to get a little complicated and hard to keep track of. What does this kind of notation when we're accessing the name and we're accessing the age like this, what does that remind you of what you've been learning recently? Yeah, Rakshan. Yeah, so why don't we just have a class where we're making new objects and giving them attributes? Exactly. Okay, you guys are right on top of it. So we could have a class of a star. We can call it whatever we want, but we would have some sort of a class. And so we would come over here to our lib and we would want to actually add another file to keep track of our class. And so we'll turn this into more of object-oriented programming because that's what we've been learning, and because that's a better way to deal with our information that we take from websites instead of storing them in these crazy hashes. And you'll see as you go, like why, like once we have more information, it really will matter. So I'm going to make a new file, and star is, I think, actually going to confuse me, even though it really is a star. So I'm going to call it a person .rb. And now we will have another file, and this will be our class of person. And what are the attributes that I should give this person? based on what we've been doing so far? Yeah, the name and the age, because those are the two attributes we were trying to fill into our hash. And then we would want to initialize this person. And for right now, we're going to initialize them with a name and an age in that order. So we'll kind of pass in arguments in that way. And we'll initialize it with an age. And then maybe we would want to save this object. And so we could just save it in the initialize, or we could make a separate save method. So we could say save and pass them in down here. Do you guys have a preference if we do it as a save method or inside the initialize? No preference, it sounds like. And then we'll have a reader method that returns back the value of our all. So we'll go in here and we'll just say self dot save. Okay, that looks good. Looks like we've got a person class. So this means that from our CLI, instead of doing this work that we've been doing where we've been storing it in a hash, instead we would substitute this out. Anyone want to kind of help me with the code of what would I write here on line 15 to basically take the place of this so that now instead of saving things as a hash, we're saving things as objects? Feel free to unmute yourself too. I like hearing you guys talk. How would I instantiate a new person with this information?
We could do a person.new and then in the first argument put in info array bracket 0 and second argument info array bracket 1.
Perfect. And this will make our new person object. It will make 5 people because remember we're in an iteration and we no longer now have to save this information. We don't need to map. We can just do a simple iteration. And we'll leave this because this was just helping us grab the correct info out. But now we have our new people. And so we should now have 5 new people created after this runs. And so one other person, I want you to help me out. I need to rewrite this so it's now referencing our person.all method and spitting it back out information of an object. So Rakshan, thank you for helping me on this last one. Anyone else feel confident, maybe not even confident, just brave, in helping me? How would I print out the people using objects instead of hashes?
I think I would do person.all.each.
Cool. That's how I would start too.
And then in like yeah, that's fine. And puts I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. You got to start it off to the right spot. We did want to start with person.all. How would we change what's listed in here? Anyone else want to jump in? Oh, Kevin, I see you've got.
Before you change that, I think you would have to take out star.index that's in the pipes and put in person because each element is a person now.
So at the end of the day, we can name these whatever we want. So we could call it star, but for readability's sake, I 100% agree with you, Lucy. The next person who comes along is gonna be like, why does it say star there? We're iterating over a person. I don't know why I typed people. But so it would make more sense to call this a person. Our program will not break if we call it a star though.
Yeah, I just realized I didn't realize we were doing each with index, so I was confused about the 2 things in the pipes, but that's actually fine. And you could do
Oh.
like star dot or person dot name down there.
Exactly. Yeah, I see what you're saying. So you were thinking before we were iterating over hash and now we're objects, but yes, this part, the IDX, is purely because I included with index. That's where that second argument comes from. And then here as well, and I see Kevin, you gave us an answer, we would do person.age. So it's gonna look pretty similar, but it's a more flexible way when we start using objects, especially as you see as it goes further and further, it'll be a little bit more flexible. So at the moment, this is not going to run. This is going to break. I do want you to just see the error that we get, because this is like a common error that you might have when you start working on your project. So we have an uninitialized constant person name error. Any guesses as to why that is?
You need to have the run file require the person file.
Yeah, so we would want to require that file as well. And for organization's sake, we're gonna require it in here, so that they all get preloaded before we start running everything. Another change that I want us to make is we're actually gonna turn this into a class as well. We want everything to be object oriented. So for the sake of it, we'll move this over. And then the other big change that we'll make is we now have to call this a little bit different. So this method can still be run, it can still start our program, but we have to call our CLI a little bit different. So this is a class, this is an instance method. In order to now call run, it's pretty important that an instance is before it. So what we can do is we can say CLI.new, and this will give us an instance of the CLI. So maybe I'll just call it instance. And then I can call instance.run. Maybe I'll say CLI instance. You could also do this in one line. That is the same thing as saying CLI.new.run. And this is the same thing. Whichever one is easier for your brain to comprehend, go with that one. Again, sometimes I just think when you're learning something, it's easier to do it step by step instead of chaining all of the commands. But this is doing the same thing. This is an instance of a CLI. This is calling our instance method. So now we should get this to work. And if we've done everything correctly, it's actually not gonna, we'll still get the exact same output we had initially. And we didn't because I messed something up. Uninitialized class variable at all in person. Oh, that was my bad. There we go. So it still works the same that we turned it into this. Why is this class name all uppercase? Good question. So that's more of just the way we call a CLI. It stands for command line interface because this is our command line and it's interfacing with our command line. And so the only reason that this one is all caps is just because of the way that we these are all standing for things. You could do it like a normal class and call it like this. It's just traditionally you will see it written as CLI. Yeah, but great question. So one more thing as you're going through this and we're thinking about scraping, and you'll see this in some of your labs, is we really like each file in each class to have a primary responsibility. So our person class is only responsible for initializing and saving our people. Our CLI class should only be responsible for interfacing with the command line. And so we really need one more class. We need one class that's responsible for scraping. And that's all it does, because it will clean up your code a whole lot and make your organization a little bit easier. So the final piece that we need to add is we need to add a scraping file. So I'll call it a scraper class. And in our scraper class, similarly, we'll just call it class scraper. And we will basically move over all of our code in here that was dealing with scraping. And specifically, and this is one big difference, is our scraper class, we're gonna make this a class level method where it's going to basically handle any and all of our our scraping. So we were scraping the stars. So I'm going to call this scrape stars birthdays. I don't know, you can call it that. And then inside of here is where we want to put basically all of our code that had to deal with scraping, which means this had to deal with scraping and pretty much all the way through here. Our CLI looks much cleaner now. We will also want to move the requires that deal with this into here for now. So because really we're using Nokogiri and OpenURI in our scraper, I'm going to go ahead and put these in our scraper class as well. And then finally, just like so we don't end up with the same errors we did last time, we will also want to make sure that we've required our scraper. Looking through here, this should work. It is handling our scraping. Let's make sure all of our ends line up. Something is, nope, they're good. And then we need to call that oh, go for it, Lucy.
So at the bottom of the scraper, I don't know if this is a problem or not, but I've noticed that person here is not required, and then you call person.new. Is that going to cause a problem or not?
Wonderful question. So the reason it's not is because this way this executable file works is it is preloading all of our classes. So it is loading all 3 of these files. And so because all 3 of these files get loaded before we call our CLI, now each file knows about the other one.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And we're basically we're gonna keep working on this tomorrow. Like we're gonna like dive deeper and get to like a second level and like more deeper into the scraping tomorrow. It's kind of, I know this is like intro to scraping and the next one's like building a CLI scraper, but really it takes 2 hours to get through all of it. So that's why we're doing like, this is our intro to scraping, but we're also building a CLI, and then we'll basically finish building it tomorrow. And one piece that we'll do is we'll actually turn all of this into an environment file. And so all we'll have to do is require an environment file, and our environment file will load everything else that we need so that when we run our CLI, everything is preloaded. Good question though. So the last part that we need to do, and then we'll wrap up here, is we have to call this method. Because this is a class method, how would I call this method from my CLI? Any ideas? How do we call a class method in general? Perfect. Yeah, I know you might not know the name of the method. That's okay. Yeah, so we will call the class itself, and then we will call the class method. And so what should be happening here is when we basically instantiate the CLI, we run this method in the CLI that says welcome, that scrapes, and then it's going to output all of our stars. If we really, really wanted to be like good at keeping track of this, we would also even just make a separate method that is like display stars birthdays. And we would actually probably move this information down here and instead, why did that get so out of line? And instead call this method. So now it should still work, but we're actually dealing with, it has now been organized and format in a way that we have like single responsibility principle, where our CLI has the single responsibility of interacting with our command line interface. Our scraper has a single principle of scraping from the websites and dealing with the .css. And then our person class has the single responsibility of initializing and saving our people, with all of them working together and actually still outputting our final output that we need. We are just about at time. I have not connected to this to GitHub, and I will be connecting it to GitHub so that I can share the repo with you in the code. Any questions over things that we've gone over so far today? And if you think of questions after we leave, we're going to be coming back to this tomorrow. So if there's specific things like dealing with scraping that you would really like to make sure we cover, tomorrow we're going to be dealing with links. And when we start looking at like A tag links, it's a little bit tougher. And so that's going to be one piece that we go over. And the final thing that I want to leave you with before you go is my favorite resource from scraping. Please ignore the name of it. It really is a solid site for showing you how to go through like and parse different nokugiri. So if you're getting stuck on like what to do, coming down here, they have like really good examples of, if I want to grab just this, they'll show you the CSS that you could use to get to it. So they have really good examples to help you see what you need to include in your .css in order to grab what you need. Lucy, were you about to ask a question?
No, I think everything's pretty clear to me. I'll let you know if I have any more questions.
Okay, cool. I just had saw you unmuted, so I just wanted to make sure. Awesome. Well, I've been writing bookmarks now and using a stopwatch. What do you mean by that? Writing the bookmarks down, like the different links that I share?
You know, like every time like you're about to show us something, I'll look at the stopwatch and then write down the time, and then I write down what about to show us down, and then like whenever you upload it on YouTube, I'm gonna write down the time. Like for example, you said something at in 10 minutes of the video, I'm gonna put a comment on YouTube saying 10 minutes. You said this, and then you click that. It'll take you straight to it.
Perfect. Okay, yes, that would be really, really helpful. I think for everyone, they would appreciate that, because I know in an hour-long video, usually you're just looking for one specific thing. And so thank you so much for doing that. Yeah, that would be awesome. Feel free to add it, because even if it's not perfect, it will probably get someone to the right section.
Okay.
And Wally, I'm sorry that you are lost. We will come back to this tomorrow and we will re-tackle it. Feel free to put any questions in the meantime in the tech channel.
Alrighty.
Cool. Thanks guys for coming, and be ready to dive back in and keep going tomorrow. Bye everyone.
Thank you.